Hello, I'm Arthur Kent. Welcome to History Undercover. In 1953, the Eisenhower administration decided the Prime Minister of Iran had to go, and the CIA swung into action. Newly published documents reveal exactly how American spies helped topple one government and installed another. Some observers regard the covert operation as a triumph in the war against communism, others as an example of the CIA at its most arrogant. Only now, nearly half a century later, can the entire story be told. Join us as History Undercover presents Anatomy of a Coup. In 1979, Americans watched in surprise as the nation's longtime ally, the Shah of Iran, was ousted from power, and Iran's government was taken over by stern-faced Muslim fundamentalists led by the Ayatollah Khomeini. Surprise turned into horror when the American embassy was overrun by student demonstrators backed by the Ayatollah. Americans were held hostage inside the embassy for 444 days. The level of anti-American hatred shocked the American people, who didn't understand why their country was being reviled as the Great Satan.
It did come as a big surprise to Americans when they saw hostages blindfolded on television that there was any kind of animus on the part of Iranians toward the U.S. There was no sense that we had ever done anything to them, when in fact we had intervened in the most extreme way short of a military invasion.
The stage for these events may have been set 26 years earlier in another coup in the same country, a coup planned and aided this time by the American Central Intelligence Agency. In 1953, Iran's elected prime minister was overthrown and Shah Reza Pahlavi's peacock throne saved by a military-backed coup. The CIA's involvement in that operation has never been officially acknowledged, the details kept secret, until now. A document written less than a year after the coup by the coup's chief CIA planner is still classified. It reveals all the planning and unexpected consequences. Early this year, it was obtained by a reporter for the New York Times.
That history stayed in the files of the CIA for another nearly 50 years until I was given a copy of it earlier this year. What this history really shows is a blow-by-blow account of how the CIA conducted its first operation to overthrow a foreign government.
1953 was a key moment not just for Iran and the Middle East, but also for the United States and particularly for the CIA.
The operation became a model for the CIA's attempts to undermine and remove other foreign governments. The action reflected how the American government then saw its role in the world.
We are there to stay until the constitutional authority of the Republic is fully restored.
The Cold War was on us. The Cold War was a very frightening thing. There was a war in Korea, lest we forget.
In the early 1950s, the Cold War was close to turning hot. There was war in Korea and political conflicts around the globe. The Soviets tested their first hydrogen bomb.
Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
At home, fear of communism was at its peak. In the fall of 1952, war hero General Dwight D. Eisenhower was swept into the presidency on a platform that promised to roll back the communist threat.
You have summoned me on behalf of millions of your fellow Americans to lead a great crusade for freedom in America and freedom in the world.
Eisenhower's chief allies in his battle against communism were two brothers. He appointed John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State and Allen Dulles as head of the fledgling Central Intelligence Agency. Never before had two siblings shared so much power over American foreign policy.
I think what was important with Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles coming in was that you had these two brothers who could kind of seamlessly connect overt foreign policy and covert foreign policy for the first time.
The CIA was born out of the wartime OSS in 1947. Its charter was as an intelligence-gathering organization, but under Allen Dulles, the agency would increasingly resort to covert political actions against foreign governments. The CIA would become the secret warriors in the shadows of the Cold War.
We considered ourselves paladins of the Cold War. I mean, this was something, we had our heart in this thing.
The CIA's first target was Iran. Once the ancient kingdom of Persia, it was strategically located, sharing a 500-mile border with the Soviet Union. Iran was a poor country, but it was rich with oil. The country was going through a time of upheaval. The monarch of Iran was Shah Reza Pahlavi, who had ascended to the throne after his father was kicked off it by the British during World War II because of his pro-German sympathies. The young Shah often clashed with the popular head of the Iranian government, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh.
When Mossadegh became prime minister in 1951, he already had a reputation as an incorruptible politician, a well-known patriot and nationalist.
Mossadegh was revered in the Middle East for standing up to Great Britain and nationalizing Iran's oil industry, which had been run by the British since 1909.
The British controlled all aspects of the industry. The Iranians had no say in production, no say in pricing. They couldn't look at the company accounts. And the British made more in taxes alone from Iranian oil than the Iranians earned from their own industry. And he seized on this extraordinarily emotional and popular issue of nationalization of the oil industry and his championing of that issue. And given the fact that he was a powerful public speaker and had a great deal of charisma, made him an overnight sensation, as it were.
To many Westerners, however, Mossadegh's leadership style seemed frankly odd.
Well, he was somewhat eccentric, but I think, those qualities that made him appear a bit of a comic figure abroad were precisely the factors that endeared him to an Iranian population. He showed his emotion in public. He often fell ill. He received foreign visitors in his pajamas. But he did have a common touch, and he was very popular with the people.
Under President Truman, the United States initially supported Mossadegh as the kind of democratic leader who could serve as a bulwark against communism in the developing countries. When Mossadegh kicked the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company out of the country, the British were ready to invade. But Truman and his Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, nixed the action.
That Mossadegh got along very well with us. Acheson personally saw a great deal of him, and they couldn't have hit it off better, let's put it that way. He was a charming man, Mossadegh, in his own strange way, perhaps, to some of our thinking, but he was a genuine person and a very intelligent person and had a remarkable sense of humor. So it wasn't a question of him as a person at any time that caused the United States to worry about his position as Prime Minister.
But what did worry the U.S. government was that by 1952, the coalition of political parties Mossadegh had built in Iran was falling apart. The country was suffering economic hardship because of a worldwide boycott of Iranian oil imposed by the British in retaliation against Mossadegh. The Prime Minister himself was becoming increasingly isolated, with Iran's Communist Party the only large group supporting him. And the British Secret Intelligence Service, known as MI6, was actively working to destroy him.
MI6 were attempting to put their own politicians into power, and they did actually control a large number of MPs in the Iranian parliament through bribes, some subventions and the rest. And I think it was kind of inevitable that MI6 were going to have a go at bringing him down.
The classified CIA documents reveal that the British first approached the CIA about removing Mossadegh in the fall of 1952, about a year after nationalization of the oil began. Truman turned them down. But by January of 1953, Truman was out and Eisenhower was in. The Dulles brothers were now running foreign policy. The British asked for help again.
In very early 1953, I was approached by the British, my colleagues, whom I had a very good relationship with.
John Waller was a young CIA Iranian specialist working under diplomatic cover at the American Embassy in Tehran when British intelligence agents broached the subject of a joint political action to overthrow Prime Minister Mossadegh.
They just wanted my opinions, I guess is what it was, and it was a very interesting session, one that took me quite by surprise, although I think they'd been in touch with Washington before that. And so I guess all I said was that it might be a good idea if it's workable.
I think it's pretty clear that MI6 used the communist bogey to bring the Americans on board.
Although Mossadegh was not a communist and was the elected leader of a friendly nation, the Dulles brothers feared his troubles at home would inevitably lead to a communist takeover in Iran.
It would become a puppet of Moscow. That was the fear, and I think that was why they ended up doing it. Whether it was a realistic fear or not is still open to debate today.
March 1953, the decision is made. John Dulles informs his brother Alan that it is not in American interest for the Mossadegh government to remain in power in Iran, and asks the CIA to draft a plan to remove him. By mid-April, the CIA determines that an overthrow of Mossadegh was possible through covert operations. Alan Dulles approves $1 million to be used in any way that would bring about the fall of Mossadegh. By May, CIA operatives and British agents are meeting in Cyprus, drawing up their plans. They name their mission Operation TP Ajax.
It was an act of teamwork. It was the first time the British and the Americans worked together on something like this.
June 14th, 1953. The plan is submitted to the highest levels of both governments for approval.
It was not a case of Peck's bad boys meddling in a country. It was a case of the considered wishes and cerebrations of Winston Churchill, President Eisenhower, Secretary of State and Foreign Minister of England, MI6, CIA, and the foreign offices all the way down that bought into this thing with a certain vigor.
Ironically, at the same time, the British-led boycott on Iranian oil is actually forcing Mossadegh to make overtures to the communists. Kenneth Love is a young New York Times reporter on his first foreign assignment in Tehran when the Prime Minister grants him an interview from bed.
The boycott was oppressing Persia very seriously, and Mossadegh said, I would like to work with the Americans, but I will have to, I have to look after my own country first, and if I have to go to the Chinese or the Russians, I have to. And that seemed reasonable to me. But now I suspect that John Foster Dulles, when he read that in the Times the next day, said, yep, he's got to go.
The proposed coup's success hinges on the cooperation of Iran's king. But both the CIA and MI6 have doubts about the Shah.
They did regard him as being something of a weak character and personality, and they needed to put some backbone into him.
Though the CIA document paints the Shah as vacillating and indecisive, the coup planners are determined to secure him in power. He is central to their plot. The plan is to use agent provocateurs and propaganda to roil the political waters in Iran and convince the public of a communist threat to take over their country. Once this is accomplished, the Shah is to issue 2 royal edicts. One will dismiss Mossadegh, and the other name a new prime minister to take control of the government. Military, which is loyal to the Shah, will back him up. July 25, 1953. A top CIA operative, Kermit Roosevelt, arrives in Tehran to direct the operation. Kim Roosevelt is the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt and head of the CIA's Near East and Asia Division. He has at his disposal Britain's Iranian agents and a radio and cable link-up with MI6 agents on Cyprus.
They were operating from Cyprus by radio, but they actually needed somebody on the ground to contact the agents, to get the ball rolling, and Roosevelt was an ideal operator for that. Very close to the British, very good intelligence officer, and also ideally suited to that covert action style.
According to the CIA's classified history, Roosevelt's biggest challenge is to win the support of the Shah for his own coup.
The Shah was understandably hesitant, and who wouldn't be to undertake something of this magnitude?
He had reason to hesitate. After all, he was being given what appears, I think, by any objective judgment, a rather half-baked plan. He was being asked to cooperate with two foreign governments in the overthrow of his own prime minister.
The Shah resists joining the CIA plot. The agency recruits people close to him to apply pressure. The first is the Shah's own twin sister, Princess Ashraf. She has been exiled from Iran by Mossadegh, who considers her an enemy.
She was a very remarkable woman. She was a leader of people and a dynamic person, and not one that found it difficult to make up her mind about anything.
In July of 1953, agents from the CIA and MI6 visit the princess on the French Riviera and persuade her to return to Iran and convince her brother to follow the plot. Her arrival triggers protests from pro-Mossadegh supporters. On July 29th, Princess Ashraf sees her brother and persuades him to meet with General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, a man the Shah trusts. Schwarzkopf headed an American military mission to Iran during World War II. Schwarzkopf's son and namesake will later gain fame as commander of the Allied forces during the Persian Gulf War. August 1st, the Shah meets with Schwarzkopf. According to the secret history, the Shah is so convinced his palace is bugged, he climbs atop a table in the center of the grand ballroom and insists the general join him there while they talk. Despite Schwarzkopf's arguments, the Shah refuses to sign the royal decrees firing Mossadegh, afraid the army will not back him. Finding Mossadegh's replacement proves easier than pinning down the Shah. Early on, the CIA backs General Fazlollah Zahedi.
General Zahedi was an officer in the army whose career went back to the 1930s. He had served under the Shah's father. In World War II, oddly enough, the British arrested him because they suspected him of pro-Nazi sympathies. But during the oil nationalization crisis, as a member of parliament, he had become a very strong critic of Mossadegh, and he caught the attention of the Americans and also of the British.
And I think there was a feeling that he was nobody's pet hen. He was not, quote, the Shah's man, and he wasn't, quote, Mossadegh's man. So he was a neutral.
Without him, it wouldn't have taken place. They needed that strong person at the center to hold firm when things looked like they weren't going to succeed, and he carried it through.
According to the secret documents, the CIA embarks on a series of steps to help support a coup. Through an Iranian connection, they recruit several young pro-Shah Iranian army officers. They attempt to purchase members of parliament and bribe newspaper editors to plant anti-Mossadegh stories in the press. One editor is given a loan of $45,000 to win his support. Some agents stir up trouble that can be blamed on the communists. British operatives funnel money to those they know can turn out mobs on the streets.
One of the things that I think that the CIA succeeded in doing was to foster a polarized atmosphere in Iran that essentially left Iranians with a stark choice. The choice was either to stick with the Shah or risk the possibility that Iran would be led down the road to chaos and godless communism.
August 3rd, 1953. Mossadegh, suspecting a plot, holds a referendum to dissolve parliament. Pressure on the Shah increases. Roosevelt warns him that if he doesn't act soon, he will lose the army and possibly his throne.
He had to think it through, and he had to do it, and he did it. And he didn't have many chips to play.
On August 13th, the Shah signs the royal edicts the CIA has drawn up and delivers them to the head of his imperial guard. The plot moves forward.
The reason they needed these decrees was to convince leading army officers who were loyal to the Shah that if they went after Mossadegh, they would be following the direct orders of the Shah, and that they wouldn't be traitors. They would actually be following the written orders of the monarch.
With the coup imminent, the Shah leaves Tehran for his estates on the Caspian Sea. August 15th is set as the date for the coup. August 15th, 1953. All systems are go for the CIA plot to overthrow the elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. But a talkative army officer divulges the secret, and Mossadegh learns of the plot some 12 hours ahead of time.
There are very few secrets you keep in Iran, let's put it that way. And one way or another, the news got back to Mossadegh that the messenger was about to arrive.
The attempt to arrest Mossadegh in his house and fire him backfired. And the general that tried to serve him with the decree dismissing him was put in jail.
So Mossadegh had time to get some forces he knew were loyal to him and surround him and protect him and turn the situation.
The Iranian general who was to take over army headquarters flees when he sees Mossadegh's forces are still in charge. Some pro-Shah officers are rounded up and others go on the run or into hiding. The coup collapses.
All through that night, the CIA officers who were in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran were getting reports of everything falling apart, and they would hear from their agents who were on the run trying to get back to the U.S. Embassy for haven or were running to houses around the city, and the CIA didn't know what to do.
August 16th. In the morning, Tehran radio announces that there has been an attempted coup, but Mossadegh has prevailed. General Zahedi is named as the leader of the coup, and a price is put on his head. In his haven by the Caspian Sea, the Shah hears the news in dismay.
The Shah fled. The Shah and the Empress Soraya fled to Baghdad, which was big news. Everything in Iran was always unexpectedly momentous. The Shah fled.
They're really in trouble now, and it really looks like the whole thing is about to end.
In Washington, the news of the setback is greeted with anguish and concern.
It had been a source of disappointment and fear, if you will, but then the next issue back home was, well, what happens next? Who does what to whom?
In the American embassy, Roosevelt and his crew are flying blind, but they are not yet ready to give up. The CIA's classified history says Roosevelt finds General Zahedi, the man the CIA hopes will replace Mossadegh in his hiding place north of the city. The two agree that their mission can still work if they can somehow convince the Iranian public that Zahedi is, quote, legal head of the government and Mossadegh the usurper.
Roosevelt was very stubborn, and Zahedi was pretty stubborn too. Zahedi comes across as someone who actually had some willpower also. Both of them said, we're going to stick with this.
Roosevelt has his chief of staff contact reporters and offer them an interview with General Zahedi in a safe house in Tehran.
he called me up and he said, "How would you like to meet General Zahedi?" And I thought, my goodness, that's wonderful. He's underground, a hunted man. Yeah, and wants to take over the government. What a fine interview that would be. So I accepted. And we went up to the high-class neighborhoods up the hill, up toward Mount Damavand, in a suburb called Shimran. And there we met not General Zahedi, but his son Ardashir.
Ardashir Zahedi hands Love and a reporter from the Associated Press photocopies of the decree appointing his father prime minister.
Lo and behold, there was a huge copying machine. Now, this was 1953, and a copying machine is about the size of 2 refrigerators. But at that time, neither I nor most American journalists and most American people would not have been able to tell you what the initials CIA stood for.
Love and his AP colleague file their stories. Thousands of photostatic copies of the decrees are soon run off for distribution around the city. The night of August 17th, according to the classified CIA document, Roosevelt smuggles General Zahedi and other key Iranians out of hiding and into the U.S. Embassy for a council of war. They decide to relaunch the coup in 2 days. 2 Iranian army officers are given forged travel papers and sent to persuade commanders from outlying areas to throw their forces in support of the coup. At first, the CIA's efforts to foment pro-Shah sentiments appear ineffective. On August 18th, anti-Shah demonstrators, led by the communists, take to the streets.
Mobs began to tear down all the statues they could find of the Shah and his father.
Kenneth Love of the New York Times witnesses the destruction of the giant statue of the Shah's father, Reza Shah.
There was a seething crowd around the statue, which was a magnificent equestrian statue, and there were people hacksawing away at the ankles of the horse, and there was sort of a military-looking command car off to the right with chains attached to the statue, and just as we got close to the back edges of the crowd, the statue came loose, the legs were sawed through, and down it came with a huge bronze clank.
The turmoil on the streets frightens many Iranians.
It was at that point that I think the Mossadegh forces overplayed their hand, because the majority of Iranians were not prepared to go against the Shah.
Now, just as the CIA hopes to salvage the operation, the Shah loses heart and flies to Rome. The Shah's move into apparent exile blindsides his allies.
While the Shah was checking into the Excelsior Hotel in Rome, who should be checking in behind him? And at first they didn't recognize each other, but Allen Dulles. That was one of those unforeseen, strange coincidences, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry.
The game appears to be over. In Tehran, newspapers supporting Mossadegh report that the Pahlavi dynasty has come to an end. The CIA station cables Washington to ask if they should continue with TPHX or withdraw. The CIA history states that headquarters spent a day featured by depression and despair.
I think it was pretty close to abject disappointment, anything, and also concern, because it wasn't more than just losing a game. It was a game that could have turned deadly and could have been very serious for some of our people and some of the Iranians who were trying to help them.
Headquarters decides the mission should be discontinued. Little do they know that events are about to take an amazing turn. August 19, 1953. As the day dawns, it seems that despite all the CIA's efforts to foment an anti-Mossadegh uprising, they have failed. But while the Americans are ready to give up, the Iranians supporting the coup are not. On the morning of August 19th, the royal decrees are finally published in Tehran newspapers, and thousands of photostatic copies of them are distributed throughout the city. News that Mossadegh has been fired by the Shah spurs pro-Shah demonstrators to take to the streets.
In Iran, you can get a crowd that's fearsome, or you can get a friendly crowd, or you can get something in between, or one can turn into the other.
Iranian army officers and agents take control of the crowds and lead their own coup. An Iranian army colonel suddenly appears outside parliament with a tank. Members of the disbanded Imperial Guard seize trucks and drive through the streets, egging on the crowds and taking over the main squares. Mossadegh supporters are clubbed and beaten. Mossadegh has miscalculated. Once the Shah fled to Rome, he thought the danger was over and withdrew his own loyal troops from key areas. Now the insurrectionists, meeting little resistance, are seizing control. According to the classified documents, the CIA tries to exploit the situation by radioing their agents to direct the mobs. But things are moving too quickly for the CIA to control.
The Army did do things on its own initiative. In that kind of situation, there was no way to have moment-by-moment communications, nor would our case officers, whoever they may be, have enough knowledge to know what to do.
At the American Embassy, Roosevelt and Ambassador Loy Henderson are surprised but pleased by the turn of events. Kenneth Love is on his way to see the ambassador when a mob overtakes his car.
And a huge mob was running along the street and overtook the cab and looked inside, and they said, "Zindabad, long live America." And these were the beginning of the mobs that were trying to overthrow Mossadegh. And so I went up to see the ambassador, and he received me right away. And he seemed just so cheerful and happy, but I still didn't know what was happening.
One by one, key positions fall. Kenneth Love watches as demonstrators attack Prime Minister Mossadegh's home.
They would go roaring around the corner toward Mossadegh's house, where I would hear these 50 caliber machine guns and some smaller arms open up on them. And then they would come back around the corner, dragging and carrying people who were just covered with blood. It was appalling.
Mossadegh's grandson, 19 at the time, fears for his grandfather.
And at that time, I wished I could go out and fight, but I didn't know whom to fight because it was a coup d'etat and it was sudden. And we were just listening to the radio and hoping something will happen.
In the afternoon, pro-Shah military forces take over the Tehran radio station, and with that, the uprising is over.
So I think one must conclude that it was the junior officers who made a success of the coup and saved the throne for the Shah.
Perched atop a tank, General Zahedi is driven to the Tehran radio station to address the nation. But before he speaks, the CIA thinks the occasion calls for some martial music.
George Carroll, 6'4", broad-shouldered CIA agent who was described as someone who looked like the Statue of Liberty in downtown Tehran, rushed off to the USIA library at the embassy and found an LP that seemed appropriate, took it straight to the radio station, and apparently without looking they put it on the turntable, and the very first number that came up was the Star-Spangled Banner.
In Washington, there is elation at their reversal of fortune. The CIA documents refer to it as a day that should never have ended. In Tehran, Prime Minister Mossadegh escapes the mobs and rebel army officers who converge on his home and loot it. 2 days later, he turns himself in to General Zahedi and is promptly arrested.
As far as Mossadegh is concerned, I think it was very too bad, very tragic, that he found himself caught in what I consider a hopeless position. But once trapped, and once the engine of change took over, there was nothing really that we could do in being consistent with our own national interests or the necessities of the Cold War, if you will, or whatever.
Though the CIA has instituted the coup, it has succeeded largely without it. Nevertheless, they take full advantage of the situation. 2 days after the pro-Shah forces seize power, the CIA funnels $5 million in cash to General Zahedi to shore up the new government. In Rome, the Shah, his throne restored, prepares to come home. August 23, 1953. His throne rescued for him by others, Shah Reza Pahlavi flies back to Iran. Emboldened by the CIA's support and convinced he has won a mandate from his people, the vacillating monarch soon becomes an autocratic ruler. He begins to eliminate all those he thinks may threaten his rule.
He came back in 1953 determined that it was not going to happen to him again. And therefore, he would not risk allowing a politician become as popular as Mossadegh became. He would not risk allowing rival centers of power to arise. And increasingly, he concentrated power in his own hands.
In Iran, where the CIA's involvement in the coup soon becomes public knowledge, resentment against America brews.
We were very angry, all of us were angry. The young people all over the country, they were angry and they felt that they've been betrayed.
In December, Prime Minister Mossadegh is tried in a military court.
When he was really in trouble, he was not a fearful man. He was not a man who ever cried, I promise you. He's a very remarkable man. You can't help but admire him.
Mossadegh is convicted of treason and sentenced to prison.
My grandfather was condemned to 3 years of solitary imprisonment. He was all alone.
Once released, Mossadegh spends the remainder of his life under house arrest in his home village. Under the Shah, history is rewritten to erase his name, but he remains a hero to many Iranians. General Zahedi, the Iranian leader of the coup, serves his monarch as prime minister for only 2 years. The Shah then exiles him to a post in Switzerland.
He was a fairly strong prime minister after the overthrow of Mossadegh, and I think strong enough so that the Shah worried that he would become a rival focus of power and got rid of him as prime minister.
The real coup is for the CIA. Though their mission has succeeded almost by chance, the agency takes full credit within the U.S. government.
I find one of the great ironies of this is that they somehow, within the CIA, the legend grew of their great success. Even, and it just shows you that when things work out, it's easy to take credit for something.
The British, too, are happy with the results of the joint operation of MI6 and the CIA.
The problem with the coup was that it went to the heads of the people in MI6 and the CIA, and it became the model for other coup attempts.
Kermit Roosevelt is awarded a secret medal for his role in the coup and wins the praise and approval of President Eisenhower and Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
On his way home, Kermit stopped in London to tell him what had happened. And Winston Churchill was ill at the time. He was in bed, but he wasn't so ill that he didn't want to see Kermit. And so he got Kim up there, and they had a great old talk. But the remark that must have been ringing in Kermit's ears afterwards, he said, "Mr. Roosevelt," he said, "I only wish I had been young enough so I could have served under you in that operation." And that's quite something to tell your grandchildren.
The CIA, then only 6 years old, will win an expanded mandate from a succession of presidents to tinker with foreign governments through covert action. A year after the Iran operation, the CIA overthrows the government of Guatemala.
One of the myths is that the CIA became a rogue agency, and I think that's wrong. I think what this history shows is that everything they did was approved by presidents. And I think what it really did was it emboldened presidents as much as it did embolden the CIA.
In the fall of 1954, a little more than a year after the coup, the oil question that triggered it is settled. A consortium of American and European oil companies reach an agreement with the new Iranian government.
The Americans did very well out of it. They negotiated a deal whereby they took over quite a lot of the Iranian oil fields, and they got in there the first time.
Those involved in the coup still feel the Cold War justified their actions.
The accomplishment of the so-called TP Ajax operation was to buy 25 years of a situation in which the Cold War was held at bay at the northern Iranian borders.
America would continue to support the Shah for another 26 years. The Shah did much to improve Iran's economy, but his crackdowns on basic democratic freedoms create a backlash among Iranians against both him and the United States.
Basically hid behind his security forces, behind the SAVAK and the other intelligence agencies which had been set up by CIA and held by MI6.
In 1978, Iran is again in turmoil as resistance to the Shah's rule grows among Iranians. Islamic fundamentalists led by Ayatollah Khomeini set up an opposition movement in Paris. They are joined by pro-democracy Iranians. Together, they prove to be a force the Shah cannot control.
He built this wall around him, strong army, strong security intelligence services, but the problem was that the Mossadegh problem had never really been resolved, and the problem of the clerics and their control of Iranian politics had never been resolved. Iran was always teetering on the brink, I think, and I think the Shah probably knew that.
Ailing with cancer and faced with revolt, the Shah once again leaves his country. In January of 1979, he gets on a plane with his luggage, a small box of Iranian soil, his wife, and some close aides. It is supposed to be a vacation. He never comes back. In 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returns to Iran and proclaims it an Islamic Republic. The takeover of the American embassy becomes the first of many crises that lead to a complete break in relations with the United States. Documents seized at the embassy are said by the Iranians to prove the embassy is a nest of spies, which has been interfering in Iran for decades. The American government's long support of the Shah leads the new Islamic government to sanction terrorist attacks against the U.S. To many, this latest dictatorship in Iran has its roots in the American role in the coup of 1953.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that what happened in 1979 was a direct result of what happened in 1953. There was a breathing space of 25 years, but what happened was that democratic institutions really didn't develop within Iran.
We're talking about events that are now almost half a century old. And yet even today, the Americans are blamed for overthrowing what is described as a very popular prime minister and bring back the king to the country. So the wounds, I think, on the Iranian psyche have remained very deep and very durable.
Two recent events pushed the coup back into the headlines. In March of 2000, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright acknowledged that America had interfered in Iran, although she stopped short of issuing a formal apology. Just 3 months later, the CIA's lead man in the coup, Kermit Roosevelt, died at age 84. In 1953, the Shah expressed his gratitude to Kermit Roosevelt. "I owe my throne to God," he said, "and to you."